At the beginning of August, we began following God's big story, looking at the full picture that takes us from creation to the birth of Jesus, why that was necessary, and the characters that we meet along the way. And so today we introduce to you Joseph. Generally, if you say the name Joseph, you immediately either think of Mary's husband knelt with her beside the manger, or maybe Jason Donovan or Philip Schofield twirling around in their technicoloured dreamcoat. But as we've been hearing God's big story, his rescue plan for his lost children, Joseph takes it up another notch, as it's through him and his willingness to listen to and be guided by God that the brothers who would form the 12 tribes of Israel would be saved from famine, and initially, until the time of Moses, allowed to flourish. But as we've seen in the characters that we've met so far, none of them were perfect. All were flawed, just as we are. And Joseph was no different. He was young. He had 10 brothers older than himself and one younger brother. And when he had visions of his brothers and his parents bowing down before him, he was foolish enough to tell them. Now, I have one older brother. He's 2 years older than me, and we're very close. But that didn't stop a rivalry as far as I was concerned when we were younger. Andrew is a brilliant pianist, and by the time that I started to learn to play the piano at the age of 7, he was 9 and already composing. There was no way that I could compete with him and be as good as him, and so I gave up. Andrew passed his driving test first time, and I passed on my second test. And so on through the years. He never boasted. As I said, we were close, and I don't suppose he ever knew that I was jealous, that I always felt second best, not quite as good as him. So imagine having 10 older half-brothers from your dad's first wife, who no doubt felt very superior to you in every way and probably treated you as such. The only one that you got on with was your younger brother, your full brother, Benjamin, and you adored him. But you have 10 brothers who lord it over you, and you will always, always be on catch up. Until something makes a difference. You, Joseph, are your father's favourite son, and he singles you out by getting you an amazing special robe to wear. I looked up the verse that described the coat in a few different versions. The King James Version has it as the traditional coat of many colours. The New International Version said ornate robe. But the majority of Bible versions describe it as a long-sleeved tunic or a long robe with sleeves. That's a little bit different from a technicoloured dream coat. So that got me intrigued. What is the significance of the long sleeves? Well, one commentator that I read said, when a doting Jacob gives Joseph his special cloak with long sleeves, the coat of many colours is a misinterpretation in Genesis 37 verse 3. Says the commentator, he grants his favourite son a sign of special privilege. In this case, Joseph is exempted from shepherding duties, since the long sleeves would hinder him from being able to chase after sheep. So the second from lowest ranked brother is elevated above all the others by a robe, and they hate him for it. And then he starts having visions of them all bowing down to him, and that's the last straw. They beat him up, they throw him into a well, they sell him off as a slave, and they rip up the precious coat so that they can tell their father that he was killed by a wild animal. That is hatred. You'd think that that would be enough to make Joseph write off his brothers, to shut them out of his life. But Joseph has a deep faith in God, and he believes that everything happens for a reason. He gets sold into slavery in Egypt. He ends up in prison for refusing to seduce his master's wife when she demands that he does. And he comes to Pharaoh's attention by interpreting dreams. From there, it's a short step to becoming the second most powerful man in Egypt, preparing the country for a coming famine that eventually brings his brothers to Egypt, begging for food, thus bowing down before him. And okay, he does play a little game with them, but his chief concern is that they are safe and well. And then he brings his whole family to Egypt, granting them their own place there where they can live and thrive. They would most certainly have died of starvation in Canaan, but in Egypt they can grow and prosper and become the vast race that God had promised that they would be. Total forgiveness and allowing God to work out his plan through Joseph's life. He may have started out naive and foolish, but through his trust in God, he gains great wisdom. So what else does that have to say to us today? How does it speak into our lives? Well, firstly, I keep being drawn back to this robe, multicoloured, long-sleeved, whatever. It was a sign of sonship, of being precious in his father's sight. But there are many times where we can feel small and insignificant, invisible to the world around us, second best. What possible use can we be to God or anyone else? But in Isaiah 61 verse 10, we are told, I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness. He has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness. God places that robe of righteousness upon each one of us, on you, on me, on all who follow him. And that robe reminds us that we are his sons and daughters, and we are precious to him. Not second best, not playing catch up, not unnoticed, but each of us with our part to play in his great rescue plan. Wear your robe with pride. The second thing to draw out was Joseph's faithfulness. Even though everything was going wrong and he was afraid for his life and thrown into prison, he didn't for one moment doubt that God was with him. He just kept trusting that God was in control. When things go wrong in our lives, and they do, it's easy to ask, why me? And think that God has abandoned us. It's much harder to trust that God has a plan that we do not see. And even through the pain, greater things will come. He doesn't cause the pain, but he can redeem it and use it to help others. Thirdly, Joseph didn't hold a grudge against his brothers, even though they did what would seem to be an unforgivable thing to him. But he forgave them. And through that forgiveness, his people were saved. Israel became a mighty race. And ultimately, through them, God was able to put into action his great rescue plan in sending Jesus for us. We will often never know how our forgiveness of someone will have a knock-on effect and change their lives and the lives of others. But forgiving frees us from bitterness and frees those who have hurt us to play their role, if they let him, in God's plan. So, claim your robe. You're a child of God, precious to him. Trust him even when everything falls apart, and forgive those who hurt you, so that they too can find God redeeming and saving their lives. Amen.